Emily nervously played with her pen as she watched the conference room slowly fill up. The murmur of conversations and the noise of moving chairs created a tense atmosphere that only increased her stress. She had spent entire weeks preparing this presentation, sacrificing her nights and weekends to perfect every detail. This contract could change the course of the company, and she knew it. The large mahogany table reflected the morning light filtering through the Venetian blinds. Emily rearranged her documents once more, ensuring that each page was in the correct order. Her coffee, still steaming, waited patiently next to her laptop. She could feel the gaze of the board members entering one by one, some giving her a small encouraging smile, while others maintained their usual serious demeanor. Thomas, the CFO, sat across from her. "Ready for the big day?" he asked with a wink. Emily nodded, trying to appear more confident than she really was. She knew her file by heart, but the expected presence of her mother-in-law, Margaret, the company's CEO, added extra pressure she would have preferred to avoid. The minutes passed slowly as the room continued to fill. Emily checked her presentation one last time on her computer, quickly scrolling through the slides she had meticulously prepared. Every graph, every table, every financial projection had been reviewed and verified. She couldn't afford the slightest mistake. The sudden noise of heels clicking on the marble floor caught her attention. Margaret. Her mother-in-law had just entered the room, dressed in an impeccable charcoal grey suit, her silver hair pulled back in a strict bun. Her expression, as always when she looked at Emily, oscillated between disdain and annoyance. "I hope everyone is ready not to waste our time," Margaret said as she sat at the head of the table, her usual leader position. Her piercing gaze settled on Emily, who felt a shiver run down her spine. Since her marriage to John, Margaret's son, the relationship between the two women had always been tense, but today something seemed different. The hostility was almost palpable. Emily stood up, taking a deep breath. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice more confident than she thought possible. "Today, I will present our proposal for the Maxwell project." She didn't have time to continue. "Really, Emily?" Margaret's voice cracked like a whip in the room. "Do you really think you are the most qualified person to handle this file?" The ensuing silence was deafening. The other board members suddenly seemed very interested in their notes or phones, carefully avoiding eye contact with anyone. Emily gritted her teeth, determined not to be intimidated. "I have worked on this project for weeks, Margaret. I know every aspect of the file and I can assure you that." "Weeks?" Margaret interrupted again, a mocking smile on her lips. "Dear, this client represents millions of euros in potential revenue. Do you really think a few weeks are enough?" Emily tried to stay calm, though she felt anger rising inside her. She was used to her mother-in-law's disparaging comments, but she had never been so openly hostile in front of others. She was preparing to respond when the unthinkable happened. Margaret abruptly stood up, spilling her cup of hot coffee. The dark liquid traced a perfect trajectory in the air before landing on Emily and her carefully prepared documents. The pain was immediate, the boiling coffee quickly seeping through the fabric of her white blouse. "Oh my God!" someone in the room exclaimed. Emily instinctively stepped back, her eyes wide with surprise and pain. The papers on the table were already starting to soak up the coffee, making weeks of work illegible. "Idiot!" Margaret shouted, as if Emily had caused the incident. "Look what you've done. You've just ruined our chance with the Maxwell client." Her voice trembled with rage, her usually composed face distorted by anger. The board members remained motionless, some gaping at the scene unfolding before their eyes. Thomas made a move to get up and help Emily, but Margaret's icy glare pinned him in place. "I'll go get something to clean up," Emily murmured, struggling to hold back tears. The burn on her chest was painful, but it was the humiliation that hurt the most. She could feel all eyes on her, a mix of pity and discomfort in their expressions. "Don't bother," Margaret spat. "You've done enough. Get out of here. Now." The last word echoed in the room like thunder. Emily gathered her things with a trembling hand, trying to salvage what she could of her soaked documents. Her laptop had miraculously survived, but her handwritten notes were ruined. She felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to give Margaret the satisfaction of seeing her cry. As she headed for the door, she met the gaze of Sandra, the executive secretary, who silently handed her a box of tissues and a spare sweater she kept in her office. That simple gesture of kindness almost broke the last barriers holding back her tears. Emily hurried to the bathrooms, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the deserted hallway. Once inside, she locked herself in a stall and finally let her emotions take over. Tears ran silently down her cheeks as she tried to understand what had just happened. How could a simple meeting have gone so wrong? And above all, why had Margaret chosen that moment to humiliate her so cruelly? What disturbed her most was the look in her mother-in-law's eyes. It wasn't just anger she had seen, but something deeper, almost fear. But fear of what? Emily didn't understand, and that lack of understanding only increased her anguish. Emily spent the rest of the day in a state of shock, sitting in her office with the blinds drawn. She had changed her blouse thanks to the sweater Sandra had lent her, but the burning sensation persisted on her skin, as did the humiliation that gnawed at her stomach. Her phone vibrated regularly on her desk, probably John trying to contact her. The news must have spread throughout the company. She stared at her computer screen without really seeing it, replaying the scene over and over in her mind. The sound of the cup tipping over, the feel of the hot liquid, the horrified looks of her colleagues. But above all, the hatred in Margaret's eyes. A hatred that seemed to go beyond the professional realm, as if Emily represented something much more threatening than a clumsy daughter-in-law. Around 4 p.m., someone gently knocked on her door. "Emily?" It was Thomas, the CFO. "Can I come in?" She hesitated for a moment before answering affirmatively. Thomas poked his head through the half-open door, looking sincerely concerned. "I wanted to make sure you're okay," he said as he sat down in front of her. What happened this morning was completely crazy. He shook his head, visibly still in shock. "I'm sorry I didn't intervene." Emily shrugged, trying to appear distant. "What could you have done? It's Margaret. She's untouchable here." Her voice trembled slightly despite her efforts to stay calm. "Maybe, but what she did was more than inappropriate. It was violent, Emily. Maybe you should." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Report her?" Emily let out a bitter laugh. "Against the CEO? My husband's mother? No, Thomas. That would only make things worse." She ran a tired hand over her face. "I just have to. I don't know. Understand why." Thomas leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There are rumors, you know. Things people say in the hallways. Margaret hasn't been herself for weeks. People have seen her having tense phone conversations, slamming doors. Some say the company is going through a tough time." Emily frowned. As the key account manager, she should have been aware if the company was in trouble. But Margaret had always been very secretive about finances, even with her own son. Emily's phone vibrated again. This time, it was a message from John. "I'm downstairs. We need to talk. I'll wait for you in the car." She felt a knot in her stomach. How was she going to explain this to her husband? "I have to go," she said to Thomas as she gathered her things. "Thanks for stopping by." "Really?" He nodded, understanding that she needed space. In the elevator, Emily tried to gather her thoughts. John was a lawyer. He spent his days managing conflicts. How would he react to learning that his own mother had assaulted his wife in front of the entire board? The ding of the elevator brought her back to reality. The doors opened to the underground parking lot. John's black BMW was parked near the exit, the engine running. Emily could see his silhouette through the windshield, his face lit by the screen of his phone. She took a deep breath before opening the passenger door. "Hi," she said softly as she sat down. John immediately put his phone down and turned to her. His expression was a mix of anger and concern. "Sandra told me everything," he said bluntly. "She called me right after the meeting. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" His eyes scanned her face, looking for signs of pain. Emily shook her head. "I'm fine. The coffee wasn't that hot." It was a lie. She could still feel the burn on her skin, but she didn't want to worry him more. "I'm going to talk to her," John declared as he started the car. His jaw was clenched, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "What she did is unacceptable. She can't keep treating you like this. John. Emily placed a hand on his arm. Maybe it's not a good idea. Not now. She's already pretty angry. Angry? He let out a joyless laugh. She has no right to be angry. She was the one who crossed the line. You could have suffered serious burns, Emily. They drove out of the parking lot in tense silence. The city's streets passed by outside the tinted windows, the afternoon sun giving the buildings a golden hue that contrasted with the heavy atmosphere in the car. Thomas told me something interesting, Emily finally said. Apparently, your mother has been acting strange for weeks. He thinks the company might be in trouble. John frowned. What kind of trouble? I don't know exactly. But that would explain her behavior. The pressure, the stress. She hesitated before adding, the fear? That doesn't excuse anything, John replied, but his tone had softened slightly. Still, I'm going to see her. She can't keep acting like this, whether the company is in trouble or not. They arrived at their house, a modern home in a quiet residential neighborhood. They had barely crossed the threshold when John's phone rang. It was his mother. He stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Mom. His voice was cold, controlled. Emily could hear Margaret's voice, loud and agitated, though she couldn't make out the words. John's expression changed throughout the conversation, going from anger to confusion, then to concern. Wait, he finally said. Calm down. What do you mean everything is falling apart? There was a long silence during which Margaret seemed to be explaining. John ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Emily recognized as a sign of stress. Okay, he finally said. We'll talk tomorrow. But Mom. He paused. What you did today, that can't happen again. Ever. He hung up without waiting for a response. Emily waited, standing in the entryway, with her bag still in her hand. So? She refuses to apologize, John said as he put his phone away. She says she had her reasons, that we don't understand the situation. She wants to see us tomorrow morning, both of us, in her office. Emily felt her stomach turn. The idea of facing Margaret again so soon terrified her. But she could see that something was wrong. The Margaret she knew was cold and critical, but she had never lost control like that. That night, Emily barely slept. She stared at the ceiling in the dark, listening to John's steady breathing beside her. Her mind kept spinning, analyzing every detail of the day, looking for clues she might have missed. What could be putting Margaret in such a state? And above all, what awaited them the next morning? The hours passed slowly, and her phone began to vibrate incessantly. It was Margaret, over and over again. Emily watched the screen light up in the dark, her heart racing. Something was wrong. The sun was just beginning to rise when Emily's phone rang again. She hadn't closed her eyes all night, watching the missed calls accumulate. 15 calls from Margaret between midnight and 6 in the morning. This time, she decided to answer. Emily. Margaret's voice was unrecognizable. Gone was the authoritative and confident woman from the day before. In her place, Emily heard a trembling, almost pleading voice. Emily, you have to come to the office. Now. Emily glanced at John, who was still asleep. Margaret, it's 6 in the morning. After what happened yesterday. I know, Margaret interrupted. I'm sorry about yesterday. I really am. But this is an emergency. I need your help. She paused, her labored breathing audible even through the phone. Please. That last word, spoken with such vulnerability, made Emily stop. In 5 years, she had never heard her mother-in-law say please. Never. What's going on? Emily asked, feeling her heart race. You sound. I can't talk about it over the phone, Margaret cut in. Come alone. Don't wake John. Not yet. Emily looked again at her sleeping husband. He had had so much trouble falling asleep, tormented by the situation. Okay, she finally said. I'll be there in an hour. She quickly got ready, leaving a note on the kitchen table for John, left early for the office. Don't worry. I'll call you later. The streets were deserted at that hour, and Emily drove faster than usual, driven by a mix of apprehension and curiosity. The company's parking lot was empty, except for Margaret's car, parked sideways across 2 spaces. That detail, so uncharacteristic of her usually meticulous mother-in-law, raised Emily's concern another notch. The building was silent, its hallways still shrouded in darkness. Only the light from Margaret's office filtered under the door. Emily stopped in front of it, hesitating for a fraction of a second before knocking. "Come in," Margaret's hoarse voice said. Emily pushed the door open and stood still in the threshold. The office, usually immaculate, was in a state of total chaos. Papers covered the floor, files were scattered on every surface, and Margaret was sitting behind her desk, her hair disheveled, her suit wrinkled as if she had slept in it. "Close the door," Margaret said in a raspy voice. Emily obeyed, unable to take her eyes off this unrecognizable version of her mother-in-law. "Sit down." Emily took a seat in one of the armchairs in front of the desk, noticing Margaret's trembling hands trying to gather some papers. The silence stretched on for what seemed like an eternity. "I suppose you're wondering why I asked you to come," Margaret finally began. She looked up at Emily, and Emily was shocked to see that her eyes were red and swollen, as if she had been crying all night. "Yesterday," Margaret continued, her voice barely louder than a whisper, "I made a terrible mistake. Not just in how I treated you, but I jeopardized everything I've built over 30 years. She abruptly stood up, pacing back and forth behind her desk. "After you left, the Maxwell client called. Someone in the room informed them of the incident. Everything. The coffee, my yelling, your humiliation." She stopped, running a trembling hand over her face. "They're questioning our stability as a company." Emily felt her stomach turn. The Maxwell contract represented millions of euros, but more than that, it was a gateway to other major accounts. Losing it would mean... "That's not all," Margaret continued, interrupting her thoughts. "Rumors have spread like wildfire. Other clients are calling, asking questions. The press is starting to take an interest. Our reputation." She collapsed into her chair, suddenly aged 10 years. "I've spent the night trying to limit the damage, but I need your help, Emily." Emily remained silent for a moment, observing this woman who had made her suffer so much, who had publicly humiliated her no later than the day before. Part of her wanted to get up and leave, to let Margaret deal with this mess she had created herself. But another part, stronger, knew that it wasn't just Margaret's company at stake. "Why me?" she finally asked. "After everything that has happened, why ask me for help?" Margaret let out a bitter laugh. "Because you're the only one who really knows the Maxwell file. The only one who can convince them to trust us again. And..." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because if you agree to help me after what I did, it will show everyone that we are stronger than our personal conflicts." Emily stood up, walking over to the window. The city was beginning to wake up below, the first rays of the sun reflecting off the neighboring buildings. She thought of the employees who would soon arrive, of their families who depended on their salaries, of John who had grown up watching his mother build this company. "Okay," she finally said, turning to Margaret. "I'll help you. But I need to know the whole truth. What made you lose control yesterday? What are you really afraid of?" Margaret looked at her for a long time, as if evaluating how much she could trust her daughter-in-law. Then she opened a drawer in her desk and took out a crumpled letter. "Read this," she said, handing it to Emily. "It arrived 3 days ago. It's the real reason for all this chaos." Emily took the letter, her heart pounding as she began to read. Her eyes widened as she discovered its contents. Suddenly, everything made sense. Margaret's nervousness in recent weeks, her erratic behavior, her excessive reaction during Emily's presentation. She looked up, meeting her mother-in-law's gaze. For the first time, she didn't see the intimidating CEO or the hostile mother-in-law, but a woman terrified of losing everything she had fought for. The phone on the desk began to ring, startling both women. The name of the Maxwell client appeared on the screen. Emily and Margaret exchanged a look. This was the moment of truth. Emily now drew a complex diagram on the whiteboard. "This is what we are going to propose, an exclusive strategic partnership. Not just a service contract, but a true alliance." Margaret approached the whiteboard, squinting. "Are you suggesting offering them a stake in the company?" "Better than that," Emily replied. We propose making them our main client, with preferential conditions, but also our technological partner. We merge our research and development teams on some key projects. She continued writing frantically, the ideas seeming to flow naturally. They get privileged access to our innovations, we benefit from their international network. It's a win-win. Margaret began to understand. And that would effectively block any hostile takeover attempt. Exactly, Emily confirmed. No competing company will try to absorb us if we are closely linked to Maxwell Industries. It would be commercial suicide. For the next 45 minutes, the two women worked hard to turn this idea into a concrete proposal. Emily adjusted the figures while Margaret provided her deep market knowledge. For the first time, they formed a real team. "We're missing something," Margaret suddenly said as she looked at their presentation. "A guarantee. They will want to make sure that what happened yesterday won't happen again." Emily stopped typing on her computer. "You're right." She thought for a moment. "What if we propose creating a new position? A director of strategic partnerships, responsible for the relationship with Maxwell and reporting directly to the board of directors?" Margaret looked at her for a long time. "Are you thinking of someone in particular for that position?" "Yes," Emily replied without hesitation. "Me." A silence settled in the office. Emily could almost see the gears turning in her mother-in-law's mind. This proposal would mean giving Emily more power, more autonomy. But it was also the best chance to save the company. "Agreed," Margaret finally said. "But I have one condition." She approached Emily, her face serious. "I want you to understand why I reacted so violently yesterday. It wasn't just because of the acquisition letter." She returned to her desk and took out another document. "This is the financial report for the last quarter. The numbers are not good, Emily. Not good at all. I've spent years building this company, making it grow. The idea of seeing it collapse." Her voice broke slightly. Emily took the report, quickly reviewing the numbers. "Why didn't you show me this before?" "Pride. Fear. A bit of both, I suppose." Margaret gave a sad smile. "I've never been good at asking for help. Even less so from my daughter-in-law, whom I've spent years unfairly criticizing." Emily looked at the time, 8:30. "We still have time to integrate these data into our presentation. That will make our proposal even more relevant." She returned to work, feeling Margaret's gaze on her. "Emily," her mother-in-law's voice was soft, almost hesitant. "I'm sorry. For yesterday, and for everything else." Emily looked up from her computer. "I know," she said simply. "Now, help me save your company." At 8:45, they got into Margaret's car, their presentation ready and their arguments sharp. The drive to Maxwell's offices was made in concentrated silence, each of them mentally rehearsing their role. They knew the next few hours would be decisive, not just for the company, but also for their relationship. Maxwell Industries' headquarters occupied a modern skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. Emily and Margaret crossed the lobby under the curious gaze of employees, who seemed to have heard about the previous day's events. Margaret's heels clicked on the marble with a recovered confidence, though Emily could see her hands tremble slightly as she held her briefcase. In the elevator that took them to the 42nd floor, Emily checked her presentation one last time on her tablet. The graphs were clear, the numbers impactful, and their proposal, bold. Perhaps even too bold. She felt doubt creeping into her mind. "We can do this," Margaret murmured, as if reading her thoughts. It was the first time Emily heard her mother-in-law use "we" in that way, including both of them in the same team. The elevator doors opened to a luxurious reception area. Charles Maxwell was already waiting for them, accompanied by 3 other people Emily recognized as members of his board. Their expressions were serious. "Ladies," Maxwell greeted them with cold courtesy. "This is Victoria Chen, our CFO, Robert Martinez, COO, and Sarah Williams, our legal advisor." Introductions were brief, the atmosphere tense. They were led to a conference room with a panoramic view of the city. Emily noticed that the table was already set with water glasses and folders. They were clearly expecting a long discussion. "Well," Maxwell began as he sat down. You have 1 hour to convince us that we are not making a mistake by maintaining our partnership with Thompson Industries. Emily glanced at Margaret, who gave an imperceptible nod. It was her turn to start. Mr. Maxwell, ladies and gentlemen, Emily began as she stood up. We are not here today to apologize, although apologies are certainly due. She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the assembly. We are here to propose something much more interesting, an opportunity. She started the presentation on the wall screen. Yesterday, you witnessed a moment of crisis. But what you don't know is that this crisis has been the catalyst for a profound change in our company. Victoria Chen, the CFO, let out a small skeptical laugh. A profound change in less than 24 hours? Forgive me, but that seems a bit improbable. Emily completed. Let me tell you a story. The story of a company that, like many others, faces significant challenges. A company that has the option to adapt or disappear. She moved on to the first slides, showing the numbers Margaret had shared with her earlier. Murmurs ran through the room. These data were not public. Yes, Thompson Industries is going through a difficult period, Emily continued. We could try to hide it, keep up appearances. But we have chosen another path. Total transparency with our most valuable partners. Margaret stood up as well, taking over with a humility that visibly surprised the assembly. What you saw yesterday was the result of my fear. The fear of seeing the work of my life collapse. But Emily made me realize that this fear could be transformed into opportunity. She signaled Emily to move to the next slide, the one detailing their strategic partnership proposal. Charles Maxwell's eyes widened slightly as he discovered the details. Privileged access to our R&D? Robert Martinez, the COO, leaned forward with interest. And these preferential conditions are very generous. Too generous, noted Victoria Chen, still skeptical. What guarantees us that this is not just a desperate attempt to save face? Emily had expected that question. Excellent observation, Ms. Chen. That's why we also propose a restructuring of our governance. She displayed a new organizational chart. The creation of a Director of Strategic Partnerships position, to be entrusted to me, with direct reporting to the Board of Directors. Sarah Williams, the legal advisor, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. And you believe your appointment to this position is appropriate after yesterday's events? Precisely, Margaret replied before Emily could. Yesterday's events demonstrated something important. Emily is capable of turning a crisis into an opportunity. While I lost my composure, she managed to keep hers. And this morning, when I thought all was lost, it was she who found a solution. A surprised silence followed this statement. Charles Maxwell exchanged glances with his colleagues before turning to Emily. Let's assume your proposal is interesting on paper, he said slowly. What guarantees us that this change in your relationship is lasting? Emily smiled slightly. Nothing can guarantee it 100%, Mr. Maxwell. But let me ask you a question. What is more impressive? A company that never has conflicts, or a company capable of turning its conflicts into growth opportunities? Victoria Chen nodded, impressed despite herself. Well played, she admitted. But I still have questions about the financial projections. For the next half hour, Emily and Margaret answered questions, clarified points, adjusted some figures. They worked in tandem, each naturally complementing the other's responses. The initial tension in the room gradually dissipated, replaced by growing interest. Finally, Charles Maxwell stood up. Ladies, I must admit you have surprised us. This proposal deserves serious consideration. He checked his watch. Our board meets in an hour. I suggest we present this project to them. Emily and Margaret exchanged a relieved look. It wasn't one yet, but it was a crucial first step. One last thing, Maxwell added as they prepared to leave. This transparency, this ability to admit your weaknesses and turn them into strength. That's exactly the kind of partner we need. Don't change that. In the elevator back down to the ground floor, Emily and Margaret remained silent, still under the effect of the adrenaline. Only once in the car did Margaret turn to her daughter-in-law. You were extraordinary, she said softly. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. Emily smiled, tired but satisfied. We make a good team when we really try. They knew this was only the beginning, that there would still be challenges to face and obstacles to overcome. But something had fundamentally changed in their relationship. The crisis that could have destroyed everything had ultimately created something new and stronger. The days following the meeting with Maxwell were intense. The board had approved their proposal, and the official announcement of the strategic partnership had significantly boosted Thomson Industries' stock. However, Emily couldn't shake a feeling of unease. It was the little details that bothered her. The way Margaret flinched every time her phone rang. The hushed conversations she had in her office, with the door closed. The files she hastily put away whenever someone entered her office. Something was still not right. One night, when the offices were almost empty, Emily decided to dig deeper. She had stayed late to finalize the details of her new position, and the building's silence gave her a strange sense of freedom. There must be something, she murmured as she opened her computer. As the new director of strategic partnerships, she now had access to files that were previously blocked. She began by examining the financial reports from the past few months. At first, everything seemed normal. The numbers matched what Margaret had shown her. But as she delved deeper, going further back, anomalies began to appear. Small inconsistencies in dates, amounts that didn't quite add up. Emily, are you still here? The voice made her jump. It was Thomas, the CFO, standing in the doorway. Thomas, I was just checking some numbers for the new partnership. He looked at her with a strange, almost hesitant expression. Have you found anything interesting? Emily studied his face. Thomas had always been kind to her, and he had been there since the company's inception. Maybe, she said slowly. But I feel like I'm missing pieces of the puzzle. Thomas closed the door behind him and sat down. I was hoping someone would notice, he said softly. I've been keeping this to myself for months, but after how brilliantly you handled the Maxwell situation. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket. You should see this. With slightly trembling hands, Emily plugged the USB drive in. Dozens of documents appeared on the screen. Emails, reports, photos. Oh my God, she whispered as she went through the files. How long have you known about this? I started having suspicions about 6 months ago, Thomas replied. At first, I thought it was just stress, exhaustion. Margaret was working later than usual, being more secretive. Then I noticed the transfers. Emily opened a document detailing a series of transactions. These amounts are huge. Where did all that money go? That's where it gets interesting, Thomas said as he leaned towards the screen. Look at the dates. All these transfers coincide with meetings with a certain James Sullivan. The name made Emily stop. Sullivan. The CEO of Global Tech. Global Tech was their biggest competitor, the one who had sent the hostile acquisition letter. Exactly. At first, I thought they were normal negotiations. But why the money transfers? And why hide them? Emily rubbed her temples, trying to piece the puzzle together. Wait. You think Margaret was secretly negotiating with Global Tech? But why? She seemed terrified of their acquisition attempt. I don't think they were negotiations, Thomas said as he opened another file. Look at these emails. Sullivan was blackmailing Margaret. Emily's eyes quickly scanned the messages. Her blood ran cold. The emails mentioned past mistakes and necessary arrangements. Sullivan was threatening to reveal something that could destroy not only the company but also the Thomson family. What does he have on her? Emily murmured, more to herself than to Thomas. I'm not sure, he replied. But I have a theory. Do you remember how Thomson Industries experienced spectacular growth 15 years ago? Emily nodded. It was a story John had told her, how his mother had transformed a small company into a market leader thanks to a series of brilliant technological innovations. What if those innovations weren't entirely legitimate? Thomas suggested. I found documents suggesting that some key patents might have been obtained dubiously. Emily felt her stomach churn. If that was true, it explained everything. Margaret's panic at the acquisition attempt, her erratic behavior, her excessive reaction during Emily's presentation. She was afraid everything would come crashing down. The money transfers. Emily said slowly. It was blackmail. Sullivan knew about the patents and made Margaret pay for his silence. Until he decided that wasn't enough anymore, Thomas confirmed. The hostile takeover attempt was his way of applying pressure. Either Margaret sold the company to him at a ridiculously low price, or he revealed everything. Emily stood up and began pacing. Our deal with Maxwell, that must have angered him. We completely countered his plan. Exactly, Thomas said. But Emily, there's something else. He hesitated before continuing. I discovered this morning. He opened one last document, an email dated the same day. Emily read it and felt her blood freeze. Sullivan was giving Margaret an ultimatum: either cancel the deal with Maxwell within 48 hours, or he would make everything public. We can't cancel the deal, Emily said. That would destroy the company just as surely as Sullivan's revelations. I know, Thomas said softly. That's why I'm showing you all this. Margaret is cornered, Emily. And I think you're the only one who can help her. Emily looked at the time, 11:47 p.m. Less than 48 hours to find a solution that would save not only the company but also her mother-in-law. The irony was that a week ago, she might have relished Margaret's downfall. But now, I need to talk to her, she said as she gathered her things. Now. Thomas nodded. I knew you would react this way. She's still in her office. I saw her an hour ago. She looked distressed. Emily stopped at the door. Thomas. Thank you. For all this. For trusting me. He gave a weak smile. You've proven you're capable of handling crises. And besides. He shrugged. This company is my family too. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Emily walked down the dark hallway, her mind racing. The light filtering under Margaret's office door indicated that her mother-in-law was still there, probably struggling alone with her demons. It was time for a frank conversation, one that could change everything. Emily stopped in front of Margaret's office door, her heart pounding. Through the frosted glass, she could see her mother-in-law's silhouette, sitting at her desk with her head in her hands. She knocked gently. Come in, Margaret's tired voice said. When she saw Emily, her face hardened. It's late, you should be at home. So should you, Emily replied as she closed the door behind her. She placed Thomas's USB drive on the desk. We need to talk about James Sullivan. The change was immediate. Margaret straightened up abruptly, her face losing all color. Where did you get that? It doesn't matter, Emily said softly. What matters is that I know everything. The patents, the blackmail, the ultimatum. Margaret stood up so quickly that her chair rolled back, hitting the wall. You have no right. These are private matters, you had no business digging into. Private matters? Emily cut in, maintaining a calm tone despite the anger rising inside her. Margaret, you've put the entire company in danger. Hundreds of jobs. John's legacy. Our future. You don't understand, Margaret whispered, but her voice had lost its strength. You can't understand. Then explain it to me, Emily said as she sat down. We still have. She checked her watch. About 47 hours before Sullivan carries out his threats. Explain everything to me. Margaret stood still for a long time, her eyes fixed on the city glowing in the night outside her window. When she finally turned, she looked like she had aged 10 years. It was 15 years ago, she began. The company was on the brink of bankruptcy. John had just started college, and Her voice broke slightly. I was desperate. Sullivan was working for another company then, one that was developing revolutionary technology. He approached me with a proposal. Emily listened intently, watching every expression that crossed her mother-in-law's face. He had access to patents in development, innovations that weren't yet protected. He offered to sell them to me, under the table. It was dishonest, even illegal, but... Margaret sat down heavily. I accepted. I used those innovations to save Thompson Industries. To secure John's future. And now Sullivan is using that against you, Emily completed. Margaret let out a bitter laugh. The irony is that for years, he was content with small regular payments. But when he heard about the Maxwell contract, she shook her head. He saw an opportunity. Either I sold the company to him at a ridiculously low price, or he revealed everything. And the patents? Emily asked. Are they still valid? Yes. But if Sullivan reveals how they were obtained? Margaret closed her eyes. Everything will collapse. The patents will be annulled, the company will be ruined, and She didn't finish her sentence, but Emily could see the fear in her eyes. You'll probably end up in prison, Emily said softly. The word seemed to hang in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Margaret nodded slowly. I would deserve it. But that's not what scares me the most. She looked directly into Emily's eyes. It's what John will think of me. What you already think of me. Emily was surprised by the vulnerability in her mother-in-law's voice. Do you know what's ironic? She said after a moment. For years, I thought you hated me because I wasn't good enough for your son. But in reality, you were afraid I would discover your secret. I didn't hate you, Margaret murmured. I was terrified of you. Of your intelligence, your integrity. I knew that if anyone could uncover the truth, it was you. A silence settled between them, less tense than before, almost understanding. We can't cancel the deal with Maxwell, Emily finally said. That would destroy us just as surely as Sullivan's revelations. I know, Margaret replied. That's why I was writing my resignation letter when you came in. I'm going to confess everything, take full responsibility. Maybe the company can survive if I... No, Emily cut in firmly. There's another solution. Margaret looked at her in surprise. What solution? Sullivan has all the evidence. Exactly, Emily said as she stood up, determination in her eyes. He has the evidence. But he has also left traces. The money transfers, the blackmail emails. She began to pace, her mind working at full speed. He can't reveal what he knows without incriminating himself. But if he's willing to take that risk, he won't be, Emily said with conviction. Not when he understands that we also have evidence against him. Blackmail is a crime, Margaret. And unlike patent theft, there's no statute of limitations. A flash of understanding crossed Margaret's eyes. Are you suggesting to turn his own blackmail against him? Yes. But not for money. Emily stopped in front of the desk. We will propose a deal. He keeps quiet about the patents, and in return, we don't reveal his little blackmail business. Do you think it will work? Sullivan is a businessman above all, Emily said. He will understand that it's in his best interest to cooperate. Especially if we make it clear that all the evidence is already in a safe place. Margaret looked at her daughter-in-law with a mix of admiration and remorse. Why? She asked softly. Why help me after everything I've done? Emily sat on the edge of the desk, closer to Margaret than she had ever been. Because despite everything, you've built something important here. Not just the company, but a family. And although your methods were questionable, you did it out of love for your son. Tears began to run down Margaret's cheeks. I'm so sorry, Emily. For everything. I know, Emily said, placing a hand on her mother-in-law's shoulder. And now, we're going to fix this. Together. They spent the next few hours devising their plan, preparing for their confrontation with Sullivan. Dawn was breaking when they finally finished. As Emily watched the sun rise over the city, she realized that something had changed definitively between them. It was no longer just a circumstantial alliance, but a true mutual understanding. Emily, Margaret said as they prepared to leave for home. Thank you. Not just for this, but for showing me that there's always another way. Emily smiled. That's what families do, right? They protect each other. For the first time, those words sounded true between them.